Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah. It is Friday. Yes, I am late this week. Let me tell you about my week. It's been a little crazy. So I had planned on getting this episode up on Tuesday. Everything was going great. Came home from the office and the power was off in our apartment. 6-hour saga of getting the power back on in our apartment. Very long story involving bills that are still in the name of a woman who's been dead for 2 years, and just a lot of complicated issues of living in a different country and trying to figure out the bureaucracy. We did finally get the power back on, but I have a laptop that has a battery that does not work, so if you unplug the laptop, it dies. The battery doesn't even give you a millisecond of power when you unplug the laptop. So that was Tuesday. Then we traveled for our anniversary. Wednesday was that was Monday. Sorry, I meant to get this up on Monday because we were leaving on Tuesday. We did leave on Tuesday. Thought we were going to have to cancel that trip if the power didn't come back on. Did leave on Tuesday. Wednesday was our 10th anniversary. It's our 10th and our 12th anniversary. So I think I've probably mentioned before that we got married on the 2nd anniversary of our first date. So this was the 12th anniversary of our first date and the 10th wedding anniversary. And we went to Paris because it's only a 2.5-hour flight now, which is just so cool and so crazy. And I have to take a sidebar here and say not never in my wildest dreams, but if you'd asked me even a year ago if I thought that I would be in Spain 1 month, England the next month, and France the month after that, all while living in Portugal, I would have told you that you were crazy. No, that would not have seemed real to me, and yet that is what I have done this summer. So we went to Paris for our 10th anniversary. It was beautiful. It was amazing. We had so much fun. I loved it. We kept comparing it to our trip in London. Which do we like better? I don't know. I mean, there's so many reasons that we liked both and things that we were like, not so sure about. I got to practice my French. I came home. I can't remember any Portuguese. Today I couldn't remember Portuguese, English, or French. Doesn't matter. I digress. Husband was having some pain during our trip. Off and on, not too bad, except that it kept getting progressively worse throughout the 3 days that we were in Paris. He was a trooper, but by the time we landed back in Portugal yesterday, he was in excruciating pain. We drove from the airport to the nearest hospital, which was about 10 minutes away from the airport, and round 2 of a 6-hour saga. The power was 6 hours. The emergency room was 6 hours. Lots of tests, some brilliant pain medication, and we got home about 3 o'clock this morning, and he's fine. We're not quite sure what's going on still, but he is doing better. Anyway, very, very tired today. Not as tired as he is because, I didn't get shot up with a ton of pain medication that's made him sleepy throughout the day. I was just tired because we got home at 3 a.m. That was our week. Some highs, some lows, some craziness. Yeah, Paris was beautiful though, and I'm really, really glad that we went. I'm really grateful that the hubby planned this for our 10th anniversary, and just, wow, really never expected. Thought maybe I'd go to Paris someday. Didn't really expect it to be for our 10th anniversary. Lots and lots of fun. That's not why we're here. I just wanted to give you a brief update. We are here to talk about a book, and in this case, it is called The Candid Life of Meena Dave. The author is Namrata Patel, and she was a delight to talk to. Let me go ahead and give you the description of the book. Meena Dave is a photojournalist and nomad. She has no family, no permanent address, and no long-term attachments, preferring to observe the world at a distance through the lens of her camera. But Meena's solitary life is turned upside down when she unexpectedly inherits an apartment in a Victorian brownstone in historic Back Bay, Boston. Though Meena's impulse is to sell it and keep moving, she decides to use her journalistic instinct to follow the story that landed her in the home of a stranger. It's a mystery that comes with a series of hidden clues, a trio of meddling Indian aunties, and a handsome next-door neighbor. For Meena, it's a chance for newfound friendships, community, and culture she never thought possible, and a window into her past she never expected. Now, as everything unknown to Meena comes into focus, she must reconcile who she wants to be with who she really is. And that is the description of the candid life of Meena Dave. I really enjoyed this book for so many reasons. The warmth and the humor with which it is told, the vibrancy of the characters. They're just so well written. You feel like you know all of them, especially the trio of aunties. Oh my goodness. They're a character. They're three individual characters that combine to make one sort of definitely larger than life character that comes into Meena's life. And I'm not quite sure how I would handle the three aunties coming into my life the way they came into Meena's, but Meena herself is complicated, maybe not so much at first. I mean, she is, but in the beginning, she's pretty closed off. She's pretty convinced that her life is the way she wants it, the way it needs to be, the way it's going to be, and that's not going to change. But then, of course, it does change. And I really enjoyed the humor and the issues around identity that are explored in the telling of this story as Meena tries to figure out why she was left this house, what it has to do with her life, what her relationship may or may not be with the person who left her this house, etc. So let's go ahead and turn to the interview, and Namrata can tell you more about the book and how it came to be. So again, it's The Candid Life of Meena Dave by Namrata Patel. Hi, Namrata. Welcome to the podcast. I think I said it wrong. Namrata. Hi, yes. Namrata. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello. So nice to be here.
Thank you for being here. I'm excited to talk about your book, The Candid Life of Meena Dave. Before we get to the book, though, if you would share a little bit about yourself before we start, so my listeners can get to know you a little bit, that would be great.
I'm a writer. I'm based in Boston, and I write commercial fiction, contemporary fiction, women's fiction, whatever you want to call it, book club fiction, mostly about Indian American experiences, assimilated and diaspora experiences. I live in Boston, and I've been fortunate to live in multiple places, but I call the Northeast home. I was born in India, but I grew up in New Jersey, and then I've lived in Spokane, I've lived in London, I've lived in New York City, and now Boston is where I call home. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
I think my favorite part of that sentence was I've lived in London, I've lived in Spokane. Like for me, I grew up about 2 hours from Spokane, and that just does not, it just doesn't go in a sentence with London.
Yes, it's been fun to have like such diverse living experiences. Spokane was definitely different as a person who grew up in the Northeast, but it's near nature, near perfect is its motto, and it's really lovely. And I got to experience a different, definitely a different perspective, a different way of seeing the world. It was a little bit smaller than the other places that I've lived in, and I was definitely the only diversity that I came across while I was living there. So that was also another interesting part of my experience living there. But I enjoyed my time there. And probably not at the beginning, because I was like, where did I wind up? And then I slowly, that's what I read. The assimilation happens, right? You adapt because that's who we are generally. And that's one of the things that I value about my time in Spokane. And I still have friends there that I'm in touch with. So it was great. And London was completely different than that.
Yes, it is. I've been to both places, and actually, like, I would probably say I like London better, but I mean, Spokane certainly has beautiful things, and I have an uncle.
If you're going to ask me to choose
things about it.
Yeah, if you're going to ask me to choose, I am going to pick London.
Oh yeah, I'm not going to blame you for that. All right. Back to the book. It's called The Candid Life of Mina Dave. And actually, I like the title because there's some discussion in the book about her last name and how it's actually pronounced. But before we get to that, what was your, sorry, can you give an overview of the story?
Yeah, it's about a woman who doesn't know who she is, and she's a nomadic photojournalist who inherits an apartment in Boston, and she has an idea of why, because she was adopted. She knew she was adopted, and she was adopted by a family that was white, and she has brown skin, and she didn't know anything about it, but she guessed, well, maybe this is connected to my birth. And as she pokes a little bit into that story, because she is a photojournalist and she's curious by nature, she discovers lots of threads of connections that she has with that building, with the people in that building. And through it, it's really a story about, found family, or what makes a family, does it mean to be alone, and what does it mean to belong? So there were several things that I wanted to really address or think about or explore through this novel. And that's the book. I don't want to give too much away because the way the story flows, and we'd have to say spoiler alert if for those readers that haven't picked it up, but It's really just understanding who you are and what does it mean to know who you are.
Yeah, there's so much about identity in this book, and identity in terms of family, identity in terms of heritage, identity in terms of culture. It's really fascinating. And again, I don't want to give too much away either, but it's fascinating to watch Mina go through the process.
Yeah, it was definitely something that we all sort of feel in our lives, right? At any point in time, we struggle with our identity in terms of like, who are we, even to like the base level of for me, I'm like, am I a planner, or am I just like, do I randomly go through life, or what I think of myself and what I want to be versus the true nature of me, and how we evolve as we grow and how we evolve through the various experiences.
Mm-hmm. What was your initial inspiration for the story?
There are a couple of things. The inspiration was really coming across this article around Indian Americans who came to study at MIT in the 20s and 40s. And I was just fascinated by that, and the fact that I didn't know it as an Indian American, that this was a part of my cultural history, and I had no idea that this happened. And then I, wondered, like, what if they had stayed? What would have their lives would have looked like, and what would their children and their children's children be? And it was a different sort of, generational experience, because I was born in India and I came here. And I grew up here. My parents came here as adults, and their experience and American experience is very different. My experience is very different, and people who came here, Indian Americans who came here in the 20s, 30s, their great grandchildren's experience would be tremendously different. So I started thinking about that, and then when the pandemic came about, we sort of were all locked inside, and I started thinking about, what does community mean, and what about, all the people that were stuck in their apartments and homes by themselves, and how do they find their community? Because as someone who's lived mostly in cities, you're surrounded by people, so you're out and about working, you're out and about meeting friends and doing things and exploring and all of those things. Even if you were training or a cyclist or a runner, you had groups of people. So being alone and lonely were very different until the pandemic hit. And then you were sort of, absent of all of that. And I won't say just people who are alone, but even people, with families, like we all just sort of stopped in time. And I wondered what it would be like for someone who lived externally, very much externally, like Mina, who wandered from place to place, relying on others to fulfill her, to be sort of stuck somehow and unable to do that. And that's where like a lot of reckoning happens for us, right? And I don't know about you, but I know these past 3 years have been very formative. And I think societally, they've been very formative. So I wanted to explore that theme. And that's where the idea of Mina came along, and she was just really didn't want to deal with anything except just going forward and looking ahead and seeing as much of the world and capturing other people's stories behind her camera, to boom, you're stuck in this apartment and you're curious as to why, and you kind of want to leave, but you don't want to leave. And it was just this two things converged at once that really inspired this book.
Okay, so now that you know a little bit more about the book and inspiration behind it, etc., let's go ahead and take our first break of the podcast. When we come back, we'll be talking a little bit more about that immigrant experience of the 20s to the 40s, which I didn't know that much about, and I'm really glad that I got a glimpse into some of that through the telling of this story. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Do you want to be healthier, yet you just don't know what to do? All these shows telling you this and that, but nothing seems to work. Well, listen close. Golden State Media Concepts has got something great for you. The Health and Wellness Podcast, dedicated to workout trends, healthy eating habits, diet, and everything about healthy living. Join us in our banters as we help you not just live life to the fullest, but live it to the healthiest.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking today with Namrata Patel about her book, The Candid Life of Mina Dave. Let's go ahead and return to that interview.
You talk a little bit more about the experience, the immigrant experience in the 20s to the 40s, and the students who came to study at MIT. Is the engineer's house based on an actual residence, or did you make that up out of your research?
Yeah, no, I did make it up. I wish it existed, but it doesn't. Marlborough Street is a very gorgeous street in Back Bay area of Boston, and I love that street. I love walking down that street in different seasons, and historically, it's been a predominantly white, wealthy area, and I thought, well, the immigrants that came over were wealthy. They had privilege, right? So they were able to afford to come study at MIT. And I thought, what if they had, bought this house, or somebody bought this house, and 5 people, there would be like a constant who welcomed the new students coming in. And this was all just a fictional premise. But the house itself, or the communal part of the house, was based on the ways that I know a lot of the collectivist cultures grow up, where, we came here in the 80s and we lived in an apartment building in Hoboken when Hoboken, New Jersey was affordable. And majority of the families in that building were Indian American, and the kid, like, all the doors were open. The kids would go in and out of each other's houses. The aunties fed you, they disciplined you, they yelled at you, they, like, all of those things. Everybody was a parent, and even though you had your parents, like, they relied on each other to have this communal experience for their families and their children. So I wanted to bring that into this place called the Engineer's House, where it was that sort of representative of, what does make a family? Is it just nuclear? Is it the Western concept of individual families in their own houses behind locked doors, which is how we live, versus this collectivist nature of having trust amongst each other and our neighbors to be able to say, well, I come home, but my parents are at work, so I'll go to my non-biological aunt's house and have cookies. Or if I got into a fight at school, when the uncle that was free would come get me or something like that. So I wanted to bring that into this space.
I was firmly on Mina's side at the beginning when she was locking her door. That would have been foreign to me as well, of just letting random, no, they are random at first, but letting people just walk into my
random,
house. No.
I mean, it is a very difficult thing to accept, right? Particularly in light of the modern world, where safety and security is just so much at the forefront for women, and to just trust that there will be people in and out of this place. Yeah, I mean, everyone would hesitate. And I think, like, the goal of the book was to show throughout the book that premise of, like, how do you build trust? How do you accept? And sometimes you're pushed and sometimes you go willingly. And these were the little moments for her to sort of feel safe in that place and trust again.
Mm-hmm. And the aunties are a formidable trio. Can we talk a little bit more about them? And are they based on people? Are they composites of people you know? Are they based on people you know? Not that I'm expecting you to name drop, but
Yeah,
they're so vibrant. How did you create this trio?
Yeah, the aunties, it's really interesting, particularly because if I juxtapose it with a lot of aunties in the fictional spaces, particularly in Desi fiction, they're like meddling and nosy, and those were like sort of the stereotypes of aunties, right? And then but I wanted to layer in more of individuals, so they're not necessarily composite of that nosiness or the interference, but I wanted to like talk about these women as women, but also as a trio and their friendship. So originally the idea was very much about, like, the formidability of these aunties, right? And we are going to pull you into this house kicking and screaming, whether you like it or not. But as I kept working on the book, I realized, like, they are individuals in their own right. And I wanted to make sure that they weren't necessarily representatives of a culture. They were sort of stand-ins for what maternal type nurturing looks like, if that makes sense. So how, we in a lot of spaces, like, women nurture collectively, right? But each within their own ways. And in this case, the three of them, who are very, very different, but they are very ride or die with each other, found different ways to pull Mina along through her journey. And then in turn, they were also, like, touched by it in various different ways. so that they had to evolve to a place where not as much as Mina did, but they had to come to terms with all of this and how they were involved in it. But they're definitely they were my favorite. As much as I loved Mina, I was like, oh, these were friendship goals. These were the aunties that, like, I have a lot of aunties, and there's pieces here and there, but then there's also, they're just very, very, very unique to the story.
Actually, they were well, they're a delight, because you are by turns laughing with them, at them, and just frustrated with them also. But I have a friend who is like, I kept seeing little bits of all the aunties in this friend that I have. And sometimes she drives me crazy, because she is a little bit like, the aunties are like, don't lock your door. They just come in, they start cleaning, they're bossing her around. And there are times when this friend just drives me up the wall, because she's like that. But she's also got that loving side and that nurturing side. And I'm like, oh my gosh, the aunties are my friend.
Yeah. I don't know your friend, but I'm glad that you found a way to understand your friend, maybe.
Yeah, it helped put, obviously she's not exactly, but there were times when I was like, yes, okay, this makes sense. But how about Mina and that character? What about her do you think will resonate with readers?
She's quiet, right? She's a quiet heroine. She's not somebody who is going to be like absolutely a force of nature at the start of the book. But she is strong mentally, but she is very fragile emotionally. And I think that's what a lot of people connect with, because particularly, I will say I'm an introvert, so maybe I am biased in that, but I think particularly introverts, where feelings and expressing feelings aren't necessarily at the forefront of any conversation, and it takes a while to warm up to people. And so there are a lot of people out there who wouldn't go in and just with their heart open to every situation and every experience, right? And she's very much resistant, not just because of the emotional trauma, but because of the nature of how she has lived her adult life, and this idea of like, I'm just going to keep things to myself, and I'm not necessarily going to share or be vulnerable in spaces until I build trust. And then the other part of it is like this yearning that I think a lot of readers can connect to, which is that when you're on the outside looking in, you want to be a part of that, right? As much as I don't want to keep my door open, or as much as Mina doesn't want to keep her door unlocked, she welcomes the idea as the book progresses, because there is sort of this like, am I a part of this now? Am I in the sort of in group, right? Or am I like cared for and nurtured, and do I allow that? So all of us want to find a place where we belong, right? I think that's the biggest connection point for this story. We all need to and want to be a part of a community. Even the most like off-grid of us will find points of connection, whether it's to nature or to other people. So I think that those are the parts of Mina that readers really respond to.
Yeah, absolutely. As an introvert who married into a very, very vocal family, I completely relate to Mina on some levels. Did you do any particular types of research for the book?
Yes. Obviously, a lot of the diaspora type research, identity and belonging. In my graduate work a while ago, and I still continue to research what East-West dynamics and diaspora are, intergenerational in East-West cultures, tensions are, and things like that. So lots of articles, lots of academic research. And I also did very, I also had to research being a photojournalist. I am not a photojournalist. I can barely take up photo with my iPhone. So it is something that I had to really rely on. And a friend of mine, Holly Pickett, who is an incredible photojournalist, and I met her in Spokane actually, and she's, New York Times, LA Times, NPR. She's just a very well experienced photojournalist, and she'd been by my side teaching me all the things. So that was really, really helpful and important to me. But yeah, and then, character research. So Quiet, the book, if you're an introvert, you'll know the book Quiet. Just sort of, what the psychological makeup is of that. So yeah, pockets of research here and there to make the story as rich as possible.
And you mentioned character research. So when it comes to character development, how much do you like to do before you start writing, and then how much evolves? I feel like the ampties maybe evolved as you wrote.
Oh yeah, they took over. Actually, the first draft was really very much a character sketch for Mina, and the aunties were there just as a vehicle to more like blocking, right? Like they were there to set the scene, or they were there as a propeller for something until they became their own characters in a sense with their full lives. As far as Mina, I need to have a sense of who she is as a person, and how, like, and this is not necessarily research. It's just I'm a muller, so she lived in my head for a few months where I'm like, well, how would she have grown up? Like, what would her high school years been like? Would she have friends? And then, after this traumatic experience, like, would she distance herself, or would she rely on her high school friends to help her? And those are the types of things I mull. And then once I have like a pretty good sketch, I'll look at how those traits like narrow down, and I look at things like the emotional thesaurus, or some academic articles and psychology articles on the makeup of what it would be like to go through something traumatic if you had these traits, and what are some of the, because nothing is universal, right? Everything is subjective, and that is the beauty of fiction, is that you can then really have this full rich character that is just unique, that is not a caricature or of any one thing or any mixture of things. It's just unique to their experiences. So I have a good idea. I start writing about the character. I start writing, and then I learn all the way through the draft. And then I have to go back and say, is this who I thought it was? And more often than not, it's not, because the character grows and evolves through the story. And then I'll do some additive research. The things that I don't do, which come in the very last draft, is like, what does she look like? What color hair? Because I live so much in the internal life of the character that the last part are the traits, like the physical traits, and even the movement, like the physicality of the character. Like, does she wear her backpack on her right shoulder? Or is she right-handed and she's using a camera? And if in the piece of the story where she hurts her arm, and it's like, would she still be able to function as a photojournalist? And the physicality of those things come in last.
Jumping in here so we can take our second break of the podcast. We're going to be continuing this conversation about character development. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. Before the break, Namrata was talking about character development and defining characteristics of a person's appearance at the end on the final draft, which I thought was interesting. So that was the context. So my next question is going to make more sense.
Yeah, I guess I never thought about putting those in later. That's interesting.
I know most of the time you start with like, oh, what is, she's 5'8", she's got, but it's usually my, and a lot of the because it's a third person close POV that I'm using, it's also hard to be like, and my black hair is tied up in a bun. Like those things are not comfortable for me to write because it takes me out of the story. So I feel like it takes the reader out of the story. And it's usually when the editor comes in and says, I'm on page 150 and I still don't know what she looks like. So I'm like, that's a good point.
Yeah. It's a fine balance because sometimes I have an image in my head and then they'll be described and I'm like, oh wait, okay, so that's not what I was picturing. But then also when especially if it's written from like a first person point of view and they say, I'm 5'4", I have brown hair, like that takes you out of the story too, because I'm like, why are you telling, I know why you're telling me about yourself, but it's still weird.
And and the more you read and the more you write, like you start learning how others do it, right? So and then you find the tricks of like, oh, he must be like 3 feet tall, 3 inches taller than me, so likely 6'3", and then the reader infers that the character is less than 3 inches less. Something.
Yeah, there's ways to do it, but that's fascinating. When it comes to autobiographical elements within your writing, are there things that you deliberately include? Are there things that you deliberately avoid? Do those things sort of flow naturally? How does that work for you?
Yeah, I am the one writing the story, so there's obviously parts of me that are in the book. I don't think there's intentionality to omit anything. I like to, this is not my story. This is Mina's story. This is, there are not a lot of, besides the identity, there's not a lot of markers that are shared. But again, because it's such an introspective sort of story for Mina, that those parts, like I do take a while to warm up to people, or I do take a while to trust, or I am not necessarily going to walk into a room and be the life of the party. I do try to fix things on my own. So those are the things that come in, but not necessarily like, oh, I will tell you the one not significant, but one thing that I did put in that is very much me, which was the planner piece where like, I just don't use planners. And as much as people try to tell me to use planners or get me to use planners, I don't. And then that was one of the things that were part of that I had to put in there as a little thing for me.
Well, but in this day and I mean, you don't use any kind of planner. Like obviously a lot of people no longer use paper planners, but you don't use like the calendar on your phone or anything.
I have a work calendar. So for my meetings and things. And then when I have things, I'll put it on there, but I am not someone who like, I love these incredible planners that are so beautiful and like paper planners. and I collect them, but I will spend like a week planning my week, and then that is the one time I use that planner. Everything else is chaos. So I have friends who are like very much planner people, and they write their tasks and to-dos, and I'm still very much mental in my like, okay, here are 3 things I have to do, and I just carry them in my head because I have this thing that if I write it down, I'm going to forget. And then I'm going to forget to look at the planner, and then I'm just going to miss it altogether. So if I keep it in my head, I know I have to remember it. And these are the tricks you play with yourself, right? You're just like, so yeah.
I saw a meme on Facebook, I think the other day, and it was about writers, and it said things that all writers have. And it was like 32 beautiful notebooks that you never write in. So that's you. It's just with planners.
Yes, I have journals and planners, and mine isn't that they don't have anything written in. They just, the first page is full, and then the rest of it is completely empty. And even for work, like I have, I'm not a linear note taker, so I have, if I have a clean page on my notebook, there's like in the left corner, there's a note, in the middle, there's a note in the right bottom corner. Like none of it makes sense except to my brain. So
yep. Well, it's your secret code. No one will ever figure it out.
I could be more organized. It's one of those things where like, I want to be more organized. You can't make myself get there.
Yeah, I let you got to do what works for you.
Yeah.
So are you working on a new project right now?
I am. I'm almost done revising my second book, which is The Scent of a Garden, and it's out it is out in June 2023, and it is about a perfumer who loses her sense of smell, and she has to figure out what's next for her because of what she thought was her one passion isn't viable anymore. And I wanted to try to explore, it's part of this, like, again, this change in the past 3 years where we're really questioning what our passion is, and, whether we inherited these things or whether we chose them. And then what does that mean? And particularly if you're almost at the pinnacle of your career, and then you have to make an adjustment. What does that mean? And how do you sort of reconcile with that? So yeah, it's it doesn't sound like it, but it's a fun book.
No, I bet it was interesting. Like that, I'm sure that was some interesting research, but it also makes me think, I did not lose my sense of smell when I had COVID, but I know lots of people who did, and the complaining, but well, what if your actual livelihood depended on that? That's fascinating.
Right. Yeah. So I'm excited for that. And it takes place in Napa, which is a different setting to explore that.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
In terms of writing, is it something that you always wanted to do, or something that you decided later in life? How did you come to decide to write for publication?
I came to it a little bit later. I was always a big reader. All through, ever since I could read, I read. I just never thought I could be a writer because I never saw myself in books. And, if you don't see yourself, I grew up, in a very working class type situation. So I didn't have much in terms of representation. I was reading library books, and it was like from Ramona Quimby to Judy Blume to, a lot of white authors with white characters. And I just thought, like, okay, well, this is what I read in America, but I didn't think I could write that because I didn't think I was allowed to. And until after college, I started reading and seeing more books with Indian American authors about Indian Americans. And I was like, hey, I have all these stories too. And I took, I started writing, and I was like, ooh, I don't even know what I'm doing, because you learn English composition, right? You don't necessarily in college particularly. So and I started taking community college creative writing classes. And then I did some more with Gotham writers and just continued to learn how to do it. And it wasn't until about, and I wrote like really bad poetry. I wrote incredibly long, plotless novels. All of them were just practice, right? And then about 10 years ago, when I was like, no, I'm ready. I can do this as a career. And I started, I always pitched and I always collected rejection letters and I always queried, but it wasn't until about 10 years ago when like I started putting craft and the business of publishing together and learning as much as I could towards this sort of vocation, for lack of a better word. And then it was still very much uphill, because then I couldn't tell if the rejections I was collecting were craft-based or market-based, meaning diverse stories still weren't a thing for a while. And even then, and even now, it's just still a small space. And even 5 years ago, there was like one Indian author per imprint. So when you go, when you get rejections, no one's going to say, oh, it's because your story is Indian. Although I did get some rejections or like, this is too ethnic for me. But so it's hard to improve. It's hard to like say, well, what do I do? Because it's not a craft thing, right? If someone said, oh, this pacing isn't working for me, or the plot isn't working for me, those are things I can enhance and I can learn and grow from. But it's just, this is very well written. It's just, I don't know what to do with it. Or this is very well written. I just can't relate to the characters. Like those were the types of things that you just, you're like, okay, is this ever going to happen? And then about 4 years ago, I signed with Sarah Younger, who, she was like, there is a market. Your writing is, it's the first time someone who is not your friend or not someone who cares about you says like, your writing is good, and you can believe them because they are in the industry and they're not necessarily coming from a place of like, they're coming from a place of honesty because they're your partner, right? And so working with her, and we went through 3 rounds of submissions for 3 different books that didn't sell. And that, again, it was like, we couldn't pinpoint if it was the craft or if it was the market. And then it just, this one was like really a confluence of a lot of things. And I think I'm very self-aware, like my writing did significantly improve with each rejection, right? In the last 4 years. And then the concept has to be there. So it's not enough just to be like, I want to tell an Indian American story. Like you have to have some sort of a concept around that. And someone has to see potential, not in the art, but in the commerce of it, to be like, there is an audience for this, or we can market this, or we can try to find a place on the shelves, the fictional shelves, because the shelves are online for a lot of books now, but virtual shelves, not fictional shelves. But and so that's sort of the journey that evolved. And I just had to balance this thing about, am I good enough as a writer versus, is it just because of the types of books I wanted to write? I will say I did, before I signed with Sarah, I did enter a contest with a novel that had all white characters. It was set in the Pacific Northwest. It was 3 survivors there were adults who had experienced an elementary school shooting when they were children, and explored the trauma of that as adults. And when I went on submission, the number one comment I got was like, but you're not white. How are you writing this story? And I thought, okay, I cry uncle now.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Oh, that has got to be so. I'm so frustrated on your behalf right now. Like,
Yeah,
what do you want?
Like, okay, but I live in this country. I understand school shootings. I understand
Right.
trauma. I can
Yeah.
research. Like, it was just, I can laugh about it now. It has been a journey, right? Get to this place.
Final break of the podcast. When we come back, Namrata's advice for aspiring authors. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Golden State Media Concepts Social Media Podcast. Time to hashtag everything. We talk about all the fun, crazy stories on social media. From Instagram to Facebook, Twitter to Tumblr, or probably even Friendster. Join us each week as we explore the quirky side of social media. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Social Media Podcast.
It's simple, such a sad song. The one that we rely on to get us.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and the conclusion of my interview with Namrata Patel.
Yes. Do you, from your experience, have advice for aspiring authors, especially BIPOC aspiring authors, because there's still a long uphill battle for getting more diversity and more representation in writing?
Yeah, I think I would say a couple of things. One is, how determined are you? Because it is okay if the system is too restricted to get your foothold in, and then you can stop, right? Like, perseverance is a thing, and not everyone wants to sort of do that. And I've always been like, practice, patience, and perseverance are my three things that are the three pillars that I lean into. And so I'll say, like, perseverance is one, practice is the other. Regardless of the types of stories you want to tell, I really do think, particularly for BIPOC authors, you have to hone the craft, because the expectation, the standard setting, the competition is just so high that you have to continue to, even if you have like the most amazing concept, you really owe it to the readers as well as yourself to like really work on the craft. Because it also prevents, like, in the face of all of those rejections and feedback, I did not want to take on the mindset that I am being rejected solely based on my identity, right? Like, because I refuse to be a victim of anything. So I'm like, all right, if not this, then this, if not this, then this. And I just continue to try to keep working towards the goal that I finally decided I wanted. And then patience, because you can, with the advent of the way indie publishing is going, like, you can put your stuff out there, and that is a very valid and important choice, and you will find readers and you will find your audience. If you're looking at the traditional path, or if you're looking for that aspect of publishing, then patience is really key, because I'm sure as you interview so many different authors, like, once you go out on submission and into that void, like, you are just waiting. You're waiting at every turn. You're waiting at the query stage, you're waiting at the submission stage, you're waiting at the publication stage. And in that waiting, what are you doing towards that next thing? And I'm not saying I'm like constantly thinking about what's next or what I'm writing. I mean, I took 4 days. The last 4 days, I did not a single word of writing. I just sort of lived my life. But it is this thing that you have to keep at the forefront of your mind if this is the path you want to go to. So TLDR, patience, practice, perseverance.
Mm-hmm. And some people do prefer to do the traditional publishing route. That's their goal. That's what they want to do. But I am grateful for the fact that indie publishing, self-publishing is more readily available now, because you get more voices in the market. So you can see people like yourself in your books.
Yeah. And what's interesting, and I'm sure you're following the DOJ PRH Simon & Schuster trial. I think that the readers are hungry for as much as they can get their hands on, right? So the gates aren't necessarily because of the readers aren't there. The gates are there because there are people in conference rooms and boardrooms deciding what the readers want or should want. And that's where, like, I think indie publishing has gone in full steam and said, well, I have someone who's going to read 300 books a year, and they're going to read 5 of mine in that 300 books a year, and I'm not going to let the traditional publishing schedule and track deter me from that. So I think, like, even the traditional publishers are seeing that there is a voracious appetite. It's just the structures that they've put in place aren't as agile for them to be able to sort of turn towards this, right? You go where your audience is, and in this case, they're trying to still force the audience to be what they want the audience to be, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
yeah, and people argue, well, there's just some not great books out there that have been self-published, and I want to say, well, there's some not great books that have been
published, right? So you're going to find typos everywhere. There's a typo in Candid Life of Mina that I've been made aware of.
Oh, I'm sure people are so mean about that. Anyway,
it is what the benefit for me particularly is, like, because there's so many experts in traditional publishing that have, like, volumes of experience. I've been a beneficiary of that. So, like, the editorial process, from developmental to copy to line, the production process, like, all of those things that are navigated on my behalf, that I learn from and benefit from. And I think that's like the thing that I really value about the traditional space, right? Editors edit hundreds of books, and they can see very quickly what the holes are, the discrepancies, the missing pieces in your book, and you can learn from that. So I don't mean to, like, disparage the traditional publishing in that sense. Just the business side needs to sort of figure it out to accommodate the readers, right?
Right. Well, even in the sense of genres, how we can't have cross-genre books because it's so confusing to, like, traditional publicists or publishers. I don't understand that. It's not that complicated.
Readers have figured it out. Readers are like, sure, I'll read a YA sci-fi paranormal ghost story. Like,
set in the past. Exactly.
Yes. Set in steampunk era. Like, exactly.
Yeah, they don't have a problem. But in terms of reading, and you did mention that you are a voracious reader, what do you like to read? Who are your go-to authors and genres?
This is going to be a weird answer. I really like to read nonfiction. I'm just a sponge for nonfiction. So I'll read anything by Eric Weiner. I'll read just random books, Ed Young's new book, Immense World, or anything that has, like, a niche type interesting concept, like, salt, the story of salts, or like Guns, Germs, and Steel, or I like some of that stuff. In terms of fiction, my go-to genre for when I just want to be in a happy place is romance. I love reading romance. I love stories. And then I won't say for work because I do enjoy it, but I do read commercial fiction, from Matt Haig's Midnight Library and How to Stop Time to some of the, whoever's on the top lists right now that are writing out there in commercial fiction. I can't think of anything off the top of my head that I'm reading in that space, just because I don't read that when I'm writing or editing, just because I need to stay in the space of my novel and not be in another author's novel. So I'll read nonfiction when I'm writing, and then when I'm in between breaks, I have a list of all of the books on my TBR pile, as they say, and get through them. But I do have a stack of those, including like Kate Claiborne has a new one out, or I might have an arc of that I'm looking forward to reading. And then Soumya Dave has a couple of books out that I read that I really enjoyed, Well-Behaved Indian Women. I just discovered, and I did not know, because it's hard to find an Indian American commercial fiction, women's fiction writers, but Madhi Sinha, who wrote the White Coat Diaries, I just discovered her. So I just ordered her books, but I haven't started. I haven't started reading it. So yeah.
All right.
And then then I reread a lot, because some of the comfort reads, I don't know about you, but like the pandemic, I'm like, I just want to know the ending, and I just want to know what the story is so that I don't have to stress about it. So I'll reread a lot of books.
Yeah, comfort reading.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. How about internet presence, websites and social media that you're present?
Yes, I'm at NAMPATEL, nampatel.com. And then you can find all of my social media handles there. I'm more active on Instagram, and then a little less on Twitter, and then very infrequently on Facebook. I have not ventured into the TikTok space yet, but I do have a TikTok. And and events calendar is also on my website. So I'm really happy to be doing a few events and a few festivals coming up that are nice to just like get some instant feedback face to face. So those are fun.
Oh, TikTok, it's the time suck of my life.
Well, so that's the problem. I have to limit when I go on, because then you start and then you look up and it's 45 minutes later and you're like, what happened?
Yeah. No, I completely understand. I'll just 5 minutes. I have 5 minutes. Oh, shoot, that was an hour.
Yes.
Totally.
So, I think TikTok has taken over. What was it, like Angry Birds and Candy Crush?
Yeah. Sometimes I'll think, I could be reading. What am I doing? Why am I on TikTok?
Yeah. And did you experience in the last 3 years, like your attention span just got shorter for like sitting down and reading?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been a slog, and I can't understand why, because I could spend a weekend reading. I used to be able to spend an entire weekend reading.
Yeah. And I know that COVID can cause brain fog, but I didn't have COVID until a couple months ago, and I was still having this issue.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've been fortunate. I don't know if I've had it, but I haven't had it aware. Like, and I still am like, start a book, and then 3 pages later, I'm like, yep, nope, got to do something else.
Yeah, I understand. Well, we have talked about a lot of different things, but is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like to mention at this point?
No, I really appreciate your time, and I think it was a great conversation, and I'm around for anyone who has any questions beyond this on my social channels. I'm happy to chat more about this book, the next book, writing, or just the how to navigate these spaces. I because it was so difficult to try to understand publishing and it took years. I try to be as transparent as possible about the process. So yeah, that's all. I'll leave you with that. Is if you want some candid information, you can message me.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time, and I had a lot of fun. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you once again to Namrata for joining me to have a really fun conversation about the candid life of Mina Dave. I so enjoyed talking to her, and as I said at the beginning, loved the character development, especially of Mina throughout the story. Loved the aunties. There's a dog in the book, so, if that's something that you look for when reading a book, there is a cute little puppy. He is not well behaved at the beginning. He goes through his own character arc of chewing things. So if you like dogs in your books, then there's another perk to this one. But thank you again to Namrata for sharing this story and sharing her inspiration for the story and the writing of it, etc. I hope you will join me for the next episode. We are switching gears to short stories. I'll be speaking with Erica Plouffe-Lazur, and I'm realizing as I look at that I'm going to definitely have to double check on the pronunciation of her name. If I butchered it, I apologize. But I will be speaking with Erica about Proof of Me and Other Stories. Again, that is a collection of short stories. So join me for that. In the meantime, as always, if you're a fan of this podcast, do all of those lovely things, or, I'm asking you to do all those things. I'm not ordering you to do all of those things. It's not an imperative, it's a request. Follow, subscribe, etc. on whatever podcast platform you listen to so that you can get the episodes as soon as they come out. If you have not done so, a review is very, very helpful. Starred or written, great, helps to get this podcast out to lots of other readers and writers and listeners. And then follow on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Love hearing from you, love interacting with you. So if you have any questions, or if you want to talk about what books you're reading currently, or anything at all to do with books and other fun topics. We don't just have to talk about books, but thank you as always for joining me. Join me next time. In the meantime, I hope you have a great weekend planned. I hope we're just going to rest and recover from this week, which was, again, up, down, crazy, fun, crazy. So hopefully that will involve a lot of rest. Hopefully your weekend will involve lots of things that you love doing. And if reading is one of those things, then I definitely hope that your weekend gives you plenty of time to get yourself lost in a good book or 10. Thanks.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.